All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome into Three Men Talking Fantasy Football. I am Mr. Bill DeCrucis. I'm here with Mr. Tom Lang and Mr. Anthony Perez. We are here in the off season for fantasy football. How are you doing, gentlemen?
Doing great.
Doing good.
Doing good, doing great. We're allowed to wear our 2025 football jerseys. Looking forward to next year to recap this year and get ourselves ready for another fantasy football season.
It was a crazy season. We've got like we've got a nice show planned today. We're going to be talking about the top 12 finishers and running backs from this past season, and maybe what we can expect from next season. Just some early conversations about that. But before we jump into that, it's probably worth commenting on some of the recent stuff that's been happening around the league. We've had some pretty major coaching changes the last couple days to add on to the coaching changes that have happened during the year. Anthony, is there any way that Rex Ryan becomes the head coach of the New York Jets, or is that all baloney?
I think it's about a 50-50 shot, if we're being
Really?
realistic. Well, I look at it like this. I mean, the Jets are obviously a circus. They're a joke of an organization. And I'm going to tell you why they're a joke of an organization. First of all, they accepted an interview with Rex Ryan. That's number one. Number two, they completely dismissed bringing in Ben Johnson to interview him because they said he doesn't fit their scheme. Who is, by the way, the hottest coaching candidate on the market right now, and an offensive minded coach. For the fact for the Jets to say he doesn't fit our scheme. First of all, what scheme are we talking about? They have no scheme. They have nothing. They don't know what they're doing. But the fact that they're not even bringing that guy in for an interview, it just goes to show that this organization is going to continue to be a joke with Woody Johnson as the owner. And I have zero faith in what they're going to do as far as the GM goes and a head coach goes. So no, it wouldn't surprise me if Rex Ryan gets hired as the coach of the
I'm,
Jets again.
I think honestly, just to jump in there, I think they have to make a decision based on what's going to happen with Aaron Rodgers. I think that's the big factor right there. If Aaron Rodgers stays, a disciplinarian guy like, Rex Ryan, I don't think is going to fit the mold for Aaron Rodgers. So I think if anything, Aaron Rodgers is going to have kind of like the choice that coaching roster space right there to fill the team on how he wants it to be filled. You know what I mean? So I think that's what it is. And I know that's not what you want to hear, but when you have a quarterback like that and he's now getting his way, he wasn't getting his way in Green Bay as the years went on. Quarterback that's getting his way is gonna kind of Tom Brady it.
If it, what's amazing is if Ben Johnson doesn't fit their scheme. To your point, Anthony, I don't know what I don't know. I don't
Yeah.
know. I don't know what that means. But like to Tommy's point, so we've got six NFL teams at the moment, and there might be one more, but that are have head coaching vacancies. I would put the Jets at the absolute lowest attractive value on that list, especially given the Aaron Rodgers situation you just outlined. Why would any of these young offensive minds or established? Why would Mike Vrabel want to go to the Jets? You know what I mean? Like,
I
given the
honestly,
offense that they
I
are.
honestly could see Steve Spagnuolo going to the Jets. And if anybody that's out there, obviously you want an offensive minded, but if they're going to stick with an Aaron Rodgers, I think that Steve Spagnuolo being a defensive minded coach and having success in the league for a number of years, I think that will be a nice fit for that kind of team.
Let's go. Some of the other names here. So obviously the Bears, the Patriots, the Jets, as we mentioned, the Jaguars, the Saints, and the Raiders. I think the Patriots are pretty getting close to locking in Vrabel over there. So that leaves some of the other teams that I just mentioned. I would say the most attractive one here is probably the Bears, just because you have a second year Caleb Williams.
I
Um,
think I think the most attractive one most likely is the Jacksonville Jaguars because you have so many high profile offensive players over there.
a
I don't see.
winnable division.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I honestly, especially more winnable division. I mean, I also don't see, um, you know, Keenan Allen sticking around with the Bears next year. I think he's going back to LA. But you know, it'll be funny if Ben Johnson actually gets signed. You know, basically is the head coach of the Raiders, and Sincere McCormick becomes the number one overall rookie second year running back next year.
Oh God, we'll talk more about him at some point. Oh my God.
I do want to make a quick point though, and I think I talked about this with you guys maybe about a month ago. And I know I've talked about this with my other friends too, is Bill Belichick. And I said this before that I don't think he coaches a single game for UNC, and people who are like, no, that's crazy because, he just signed that massive contract. And I'm going to stand by that point. I genuinely don't think he's actually going to coach a game for UNC. It's built in his clause that after June 1st, his buyout's only $1 million. Um, what coaching
Yeah,
job just became available, and who has part ownership of that team? The
Oh, I heard
Raiders.
that. I heard this
And Tom Brady.
narrative.
No, but listen.
ah,
I do, I do honestly believe, and I thought it was kind of crazy, but it was a good move on his part to sign with UNC. I do believe he will make his way back to the NFL, and they could possibly be with the Raiders, and it's a perfect fit for him, especially with Tom Brady
yeah.
and part ownership.
I don't think this year though. At least I think he had a he's had a dream to play coach college and honestly the transfer portal has like really bumped up for UNC this year. So I don't know.
I
But
think, Anthony, I see where you're coming from, and I actually do think he ends up back in the NFL. He wants to get that other
At
Super
some
Bowl,
point.
but that would be the Raiders would be the absolute where there's no established quarterback. They're in the most competitive division in football now. Like
And
it would be
Anthony,
impossible.
and you don't want him to go to the Raiders because then Sincere McCormick, once he fumbles that
Mm.
ball, Amir Abdullah is the running back of that team for the rest of the season. We don't want that.
Actually,
you know what's actually crazy though is that he actually Belichick reached out to the Jets last month about their head coaching position, and the Jets basically told him no, which I find hysterical, by the way, that he would even reach out to them for that.
I don't believe that happened. I don't believe that
I
happened.
don't
I
know.
believe I believe that like the Jets press, knowing the Jets, they leaked that. But really, what happened was they called him. Guaranteed, that's what happened.
But I feel like he would but I feel like he would have came out and defended himself and would have said, there's no truth to that. That was all them.
He doesn't
Uh
have to say anything. I mean,
eh, maybe. I don't know. I still find it hilarious. Well, think about it. With Aaron Rodgers, if he were to stay, you look at Aaron Rodgers, right, and you put him in the mix. Wouldn't that be one of the most tractable jobs with that offense that they have with Garrett Wilson, Devontae Adams, and Breece Hall and Rodgers at the helm? I mean, for Belichick purposes, that's pretty much you just got to fine tune the game plan there. You know what I mean?
I
Eh.
uh,
You need your defense to start playing ball too.
and also Garrett Wilson's annoyed at the whole thing. I don't know. It's a difficult.
I think a lot of that is I don't believe half of that though. I think it's all drama that's built up. Just the
Oh, it's
season's
tough.
over. It all gets hashed out. It's all over.
Well, at some point we'll be talking about the team once they actually make their hires, like whatever the impacts are on their teams. And if we end up having to have long discussions about Sincere McCormick and Amir Abdullah, I'll be sincerely disappointed. Anyway, uh, so other news, we've got wild card weekend coming up this weekend. We've got some interesting
Yeah, buddy.
matchups. Um, I'm inclined to basically take the favorites in every single game, except for the Rams Vikings, and I think the Rams are home underdogs. I think the Rams win that home playoff game, and the Vikings go home. You guys agree with that?
Uh, yeah, I go Chargers over Texans. I go Ravens over Steelers. I go Bills over Broncos, Eagles over Packers, and Commanders over Buccaneers.
So then the Rams and the Vikings then is a bit of a
Yeah.
it's gonna yeah. So
Yeah.
it'll be interesting. It'll be interesting to see how that goes. I'm sure we'll do some parlays at some point on our own.
I think the
And
Vikings beat the Rams though. They need to beat them.
You think so?
That'll be such a bad ending of that of a fantastic season. That would be like the year that the Giants beat them in the playoffs, the wild card round.
well, it was bad, but they're bound to. I mean, at some point they were going to just pumpkin. It can't just continue the whole year. I
Well,
mean,
then let me give you a quick little tidbit here. So they actually have a real big problem on their hands, the Rams and the Chargers. because if they both somehow make it to their conference championships, how do they do that? Because they share a stadium.
Well, presumably they'd both be away, right? Because the Rams are the 4 seed
I don't
and
think
the
so. I
Chargers are
think
the 5th seed.
if they reach their conference championship games, they're both at SoFi Stadium from what I'm seeing.
It would
Oh,
be they would have to no because
Yeah.
a lot of things would have to happen for that to happen. Like
well,
we'd
yeah.
have
I
to
mean,
have
Yeah,
a lot,
but
a
like the
lot has to
Bills
happen. I mean,
the Bills would have to get upset,
that means that Baltimore has to be upset, but Bills have to be upset, and also
Right.
since Kansas City Chiefs would have to lose to the Chargers next week.
Right.
So,
I
and honestly, I don't see the Rams making it past. I really don't see them making it past this round. And if they do, I don't see them making it past the next round anyway. So
that's the
right.
beauty about football. You just never know.
you never know.
You've seen crazier things happen.
But if you don't know, you'll know this weekend.
Yeah. Well, we'll find. It'll be a great wild card weekend. We should mention, like, for fantasy purposes, obviously the fantasy playoffs have no impact on what has already happened. However, it will definitely affect how we look at players going into next year. There's guys who maybe that like how we felt about Kelsey, for example, did not have a good year last year, blows up in the playoffs, and we realize, oh, he's still got it,
Yeah.
kind of. And
Yeah, I
so,
mean,
like, it kind of affected how we drafted him.
and then you got the final four in college, football too. It's going to be a nice prospects to look for rookie candidates for next year for fantasy football as well in these big games.
Exactly. We'll probably have long conversations about Ashton Gianti, if I'm pronouncing his name
Well,
right too.
Yeah, well, he's done.
Yeah.
One and
So
done.
you guys ready to move on to some running backs here?
Yeah, let's get into it.
All right, let's get
Anthony,
into it.
you're muted.
So let's
Yeah, I know.
So let's get into this. So this past year, top 12 running backs. It was a really interesting year, and we're going to get more into this as we talk into the off season of like how we prep for drafts, why we talk about tiers, why we talk about the math of where you're drafting people at, the differences in what positions are worth more, why they're worth more in certain ways, in what rounds, etc. And we'll do what we can to kind of illustrate that, but just to point out, like when we kind of talk about the guys now and we talk about the total numbers, it'll help illustrate a lot of it'll help inform a lot of our arguments as we get to that. But for right now, let's just jump right in. So finishing at number 1 this past year, Saquon Barkley, longtime running back for the Philadelphia Eagles. It was an unbelievable year. To give you an idea of just how bad now, but let's actually, I did a bad job. We're going to be checking half point PPR from weeks 1 through 17. We're not including week 18, obviously. When we talk about their averages, we are not including games they did not play and obviously games that they were on a bye for. But that out the way. Total point finisher,
Mr. 2000, Mr. 2000,
Saquon Barkley. He finished the year with 338.8 total points.
Do you know it actually wasn't his best season in the NFL?
No, his rookie year was still
His
the
rookie
best.
year, he basically finished off just under 2 points. So he was 340.3
Right.
for 16 games. But he also finished number 2, and that was the Christian McCaffrey year.
So he finished 40 points ahead of the number 2 guy. So far and away the best running back. And it's funny. It's good that Tommy, it's good that you mentioned that because we should point out that as years and years go on, no matter what they like to say in the media, these bell cow superstar running backs are becoming more and more scarce. And going much more into these committee kind of situations. And to your point, Saquon Barkley lapped the field. He was unbelievable. Great year for him. This was him finishing number 2. This was his second best finish after finishing number 2, however many years ago. So running back value is but because of that, because of supply and demand, scarcity of running backs means that they are increased in value at the top of the list when we get to draft season. So we'll get to that when we talk about that. So Saquon Barkley, he completely lapped the field. A question for both of you gentlemen. I mean, I had some early looks at some ADP and underdog. Saquon's basically right at the top of the top of the draft list for next year. Give me an argument as to, or if you don't have one, as to why he should or should not be the number one pick next year.
He 100% just be the number one overall pick. He's on a probably one of the most explosive offenses in the NFL. They have a great wide receiving core. Their offensive line is great. They have a rushing quarterback. Obviously there is an issue with Jalen Hurts getting hurt. This is the second year that he's been have some injuries throughout the season. But I think that, with his rushing yards as a quarterback, it really gives the same kind of play that you're finding with like a Derrick Henry as well. Saquon Barkley, this is just the beginning for him. He fit the mold of what they needed on that roster, and I think next year he breaks the rushing record. And he's going to score a lot of touchdowns next year. He thought he scored a lot of touchdowns this year with 16. No, sorry, that's
Well, yeah, I thought he had 13, right?
yeah, sorry. That was I was looking at Henry. Yeah, 13. I think he beats that next year as well. But the biggest thing is, going back to his rookie year, majority of those were receptions as well. He didn't even touch the field as much. I think it was less than half of what he had his rookie year on the Giants. So he's not even needing to be touching the ball through the air. And I mean, he can. So I just think he is your number one overall pick no matter what. Like, don't even
I,
think about it. Don't even question it. He's your number one overall pick next year.
we'll talk more about it in the off season.
I know.
I might have some arguments otherwise, but I'm not going to argue with the sentiments of what you're saying. I mean, it was an unbelievable year, and he had a good return. Even if finishing at number one, he had a return on value. He was drafted as the running back 4 this past year in the draft. So you couldn't be happier. If you made it through a very bad opening week, hopefully you had that. Hopefully you had the bye if you were a Saquon Barkley owner for the first week of your fantasy playoffs, and you got by that. Other than that, it was unbelievable. What do you think, Anthony? Are you any reason you wouldn't take him number one next year?
No, I like all of Thomas' points actually. I feel like he going into next year, he will be the number one overall pick, just like Christian McCaffrey was last year. I think Christian McCaffrey was the MVP of fantasy football last year. Saquon this year, um, which automatically I think just bumps his ADP up to number one overall, like Tommy said. But in a full point PPR league, I'm gonna have to argue that Jamar Chase would be up there with them on the wide receiver side. I mean, he had just as good of a fantasy season from a fantasy perspective, and I'm sure they weren't that far off in
I
points.
mean, with,
So
with Jamar Chase, I know we're going to talk about him in, I think, next week or so.
yeah,
Two
But
weeks.
2 weeks. But, with Higgins coming back, and it sounds like he wants to come back now. They want to bring the band back together. I think that's even better for Chase next year.
yeah, I agree.
Yeah. And I'm sure we'll have an endless amount of arguments about the number one pick or the ADP and rankings when we move on. Number two on the list, a very, very, very surprising year. Very, very surprising year. Derrick Henry. Um,
I don't believe it was surprising.
I,
It's
I,
the
I did
perfect
not
fit.
I did not think it was going to be as good as this.
No.
You
I
draft
mean, you know,
is it
so I was super high on him this year because of the fit of the mold of that offense. When you have a rushing quarterback, he's never had a quarterback like that in the backfield in the NFL. He had Tannehill for all those years, and Tannehill, yes, did he rush the ball, but he was not he was not as capable as Lamar Jackson.
I thought the age and attrition was eventually going to take its toll.
Yeah, but
I
age
didn't
and
think he was
attrition.
not going to finish number 2 overall
No,
at
I
running
mean,
back.
well,
I mean,
you think age and attrition. He started his career with DeMarco Murray as his running back, so he was the RB2 on that roster for
I
what,
got it,
two,
but
3 years, almost 3 years, and then he got his movement. He was basically, since he got didn't he got hurt in yeah, he got hurt in 2021, but every single year he was healthy, 2019 and above, he finished in the top 10. And there was only one outside the top 5 at 8, which was last year.
I got it, but I like to your. This is me giving you credit on this. A lot of us, including myself, thought, at some point, I don't want to be the one holding the bag here. At some point, there's going to be a bit of a decline, a cliff, and it just did not happen. He is a freak of nature. He's in an unbelievable position now in Baltimore. I mean, I don't see why they don't now, depending on whatever happens in the playoffs here, but I mean, I don't see how they don't just we don't round the bases. Now, Derek's not going to be drafted as the running back two. I could tell you that right now. I would not be ranking him there. But
No.
this past year, you drafted him as the running back 9. He finishes as the running back 2 overall. I mean, it was an unbelievable year. Here's another one that hopefully you got past week 15 and the first week of your fantasy playoffs. But other than that,
That was
it was an
rough.
unbelievable year for him.
That was rough. I mean, I feel like for people that had him, if you had the buy, I mean, obviously, if you're playing for points, that's one thing, but you got lucky with that with the buy.
No, I agree with Billy, actually. I didn't think he was going to have as good of a year as he did. And initially, because Lamar Jackson likes to run the ball, and a lot of their rushing offense is focused on Lamar Jackson. I thought he would just be there more of a complementary role, definitely more of a goal line back, in my opinion, and third down back to get those chunk yards. But kudos to him, man. He proved me wrong this year.
Yeah. I mean, but you think about it though, about it from a football perspective. And with Lamar Jackson, he's kind of the same situation as a Jalen Hurts. Jalen Hurts for the past 2 years has been getting hurt throughout the season. And then Lamar Jackson, I think the past 3 years, he's had situations where Huntley came in and he basically finished off the year or was bouncing in and out with some games. Was it last year with Lamar Jackson running to the bathroom for a few seconds and then coming back kind of thing? You know what I mean? So like there was a couple situations through the season which, and again, that's putting his, the beating on his body. And, having a Derrick Henry in the backfield, that big guy running the ball, I mean, yeah, you're taking less runs away. And also you're opening the field better for you as well, where you're not taking these massive hits. So, I mean, yes, hindsight is 2020, but um, Saquon Barkley and Henry were two running backs that were very highly targeted this year. Yes, they were back end 12, 13, or early, late round, first
Saquon was
round.
Saquon
You know,
was late first. Henry was middle of the
yeah.
second.
And
Right.
so if you had the 12th pick, you landed gold. So and then you didn't have to really worry about running back for another 4 rounds if needed.
Right,
So
you struck gold, but it would have been
yeah.
like to Anthony's point, like that was basically calling your shot on Derek for that. Like meaning you were drafting him at his ceiling, and boy, did he hit the ceiling. Like I
Yeah.
mean, he absolutely did.
Yeah,
Um,
and honestly, I don't see it going down. I maybe I don't see
I
it. I see the same production at next year. I don't see him finishing as the number 2, but I could see him finishing in the top 5 because I mean, the next players that we're going to discuss, I see that they're going
right.
to get more run throughout the year and they're going to have better production in their offenses, depending on certain quarterback situations when it comes down to Atlanta. We'll see how. I mean, but Michael Penix has been looking good the past 2 weeks, and Bijan
Right.
has been exploding. So, again, we'll talk more about that, but I mean. I just think, the running back situation, yeah, it's scarce to an extent, but um, you know,
Well, it is. I mean, and we'll get to it, but just to put it in perspective, right? So Saquon completely lapped the field. He was more than 40 points ahead of Derrick Henry. The difference between Saquon Barkley, who finished number 1 overall, and the number 12 running back, who we'll get to, it's 120 points just from number 1 to 12. Now, the reason we bring that up is that the differences in wide receivers across the board, it's much more, it's less drastic. Plus the fact of as you get farther down the list, more wide receivers because teams are throwing the ball more. They're holding their value at much higher. The farther you go down the list of running back, it's such a steep decline. It's so parabolic, the math of it. So it's why we say, like we're saying, scarce running backs. It's if you are getting a back that turns into this, it's such a positional advantage. And to your point, Tommy, anybody who ended up with either Saquon Barkley or Derrick Henry, especially where you drafted him, oh my God, like off to the races.
yeah,
Um, yeah. So like we mentioned, Derrick Henry finished 40 points under Saquon at 297. And you drafted him as the running back 9. He finished as the running back 2 overall. Unbelievable year. Let's go to number 3, Jahmyr Gibbs, finishing just behind Derrick Henry with 293 total points. I mean, if you basically you could cut his year basically in two. First half of the year, he was still great. He really was great. He was a running back. He was a running back 1. I think he was like a running back 9 or 10 or something like that. Second half of the year, after David, especially after David Montgomery goes down, I mean, we're off to the races here. It was unbelievable, especially his let's just say his for your fantasy playoffs. Week 15, 25.9 points. Week 16, 23.4 points. Week 17, 24.3. He's among the most common amongst people who had them in the fantasy playoffs. He was great. And you drafted him as the running back 6, so he returned good value. We were talked about it before, and we'll talk about Bijan shortly, but Jahmyr and Bijan to me are, I would take over Derrick Henry next year. I would do that without question. And I would say that they're in a conversation for taking them above Saquon next year.
There is a slight possibility. I agree. I think Saquon is more of the running back you would want in fantasy football. He's your new Christian McCaffrey, but
I
better.
think if David Montgomery wasn't in the
It's the
picture,
David Montgomery thing. You're right.
I would 100% draft Jahmyr Gibbs over Saquon Barkley only because he has more value with the reception game. Saquon, I don't think he did as good as McCaffrey reception-wise this year. I mean, he didn't need to anyways. He was great rushing, but just in a PPR league, even half-point PPR, that pass-catching ability is just so important. And if David Montgomery wasn't in the picture, I would 100% probably go Jahmyr Gibbs.
So my only fear with Jahmyr Gibbs not having a second running back like a David Montgomery is that, yes, is Jahmyr Gibbs explosive? Does he put up 25.9 points, 23.4 points, 24.3 points in the playoffs? Yes. But I think that kind of production for a guy like him, he's not a big guy. I think he takes some really good hits up the middle from those 300, 400-pound guys. I mean, I just don't see him like being healthy for a whole year. So he needs a David Montgomery to keep that rest for him to have those explosive plays. So I personally don't know if I can bank on a number 1 overall pick next year for Jahmyr Gibbs. Now, is Jahmyr Gibbs a top 3 running back? 100%. If you have the top 3 pick, or if you have a top 3 pick, you're gonna. I think you obviously go Barkley, Gibbs, and Bijan over Henry. But you know, I don't know if I can pull the trigger on Gibbs being the number 1.
I mean, I echo your sentiments. The Montgomery situation is interesting. It'll be interesting to see, like, if he does come back from
I
his.
think he will. I think he will,
and how they perform into the playoffs. I mean, it'll be real. I mean, Montgomery's not going to play forever. I mean, and Montgomery's significantly older than Gibbs, although it's not like Montgomery's.
Montgomery. He's I think 3 or 4 years older than him.
I think he's 4 years older.
Yeah, but you know what? I mean, Derrick Henry's like, almost in a wheelchair, so he's still running, he's still scoring touchdowns.
Let's move on. We've got finishing at number 4, Bijan Robinson, finishing a bit under Jahmyr Gibbs at 280 points. Interesting year for Bijan. Here's another guy, maybe not even 2 halves of the year, but like he kind of started off a little bit slow, freaking out everybody who drafted him, me amongst them, and then eventually he just took off. I mean, he had basically from week 6 on, he had a really, 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 really strong year. And to Tommy's point from earlier in the year, talking waivers or whatever, I think the Michael Penix situation ultimately is a good thing. The fact that there's not going to be Captain Kirk anymore, being sluggish in the pocket next year, it bodes well for him. From a draft perspective, you drafted him as the running back 2. I would say that's fine, because if you're drafting a guy as the running back 2, you're expecting him to finish anywhere between running back 1 and running back 5-ish, something like that. So you're decently happy, especially with the second half of the year. But to Tommy's point, Bijan would be top on my list of challenging Saquon as to the number one overall pick. If not, he's the clear number two, in my opinion, especially because of we just talked about the Montgomery thing.
Yeah.
Nothing but clear skies for Bijan
Yeah,
going forward here.
I love Bijan next year.
agree
I
with
love
that.
Bijan this year. And honestly, yeah, I think there was a slow pace in the beginning of the season because of the situation with Kirk Cousins. I mean, he didn't have a bad game week one, week two, but you know, it wasn't the numbers that you were looking for from your number one over, your number one pick. So um, I see based on the statistics that he put together for the rest of the season, from was it week six on,
Right.
he just
Right.
was super consistent. He had one down week before the bye, but I just don't see how he loses any kind of flair. I mean, I don't know what Tyler Algiers contract shows, but I mean, you don't need him there.
No, and Algier, like especially watching the second half of the year here, like Algier just became a really valuable handcuff.
Yeah.
Like he was on the field probably enough to halfway annoy you, but Bijan was just unbelievable, unbelievable. And I mean, in an offense like that where they need to score points now, and Michael Penix is hopefully going to get the offense moving better, being a better quarterback. I mean, it's nothing but a green light for him. And I guess we'll have more arguments about Bijan and Saquon in the offseason. Um, you know, I don't
What do you
see.
think,
I
Ant?
mean, Anthony, we talked about this. I'll get your opinion. Like to me, this situation maybe at some point from a fantasy perspective was similar to Gibbs and Montgomery, but from a like on the field bell cow perspective, Bijan's the guy. There's no question, and Algier is a complete like handcuff guy, distant second. Not the same as the Gibbs Montgomery, or am I do you mischaracterize it different?
No, I think you're spot on. I think Bijan should be the only back on the Falcons field, but Algier is there strictly for handcuff purposes. I don't see him anything more than that. I think Bijan should be the bell cow.
Yep.
I don't think it's even close to the Gibbs and Montgomery situation, to be honest with you.
Oh no, especially not going forward. Um, yeah, we'll have some arguments in the offseason over the number one pick. All right. Let's move on. We've got now we get into some interesting names now. We got finishing at number 5. We've got Josh Jacobs. Finished now we got a little bit of a tier down here. Finishing with 264 points. Here's another one, a tale of two halves, really. Really, it took him a couple weeks to really start taking off, but once he did, he didn't look back. I guess the Packers realized that, hey, it works if we give him the ball and we just give him touchdown after touchdown.
He definitely didn't look back because he was second in the league at rush yards after contact. He had 707 yards after contact, whereas Derrick Henry had 843. But behind that, everybody else was in the mid 600s.
Right. Josh Jacobs basically from week 7 on, other than maybe 1 week in there, was really unbelievable for your team. It's funny. It's similar to Bijan Robinson in our league of record. I actually had Bijan and I had Josh Jacobs, and I was 1-5, basically on the backs of these two running backs not returning their value. And then after that, I won whatever it was, 7 or 8 in a row, because sometimes it turns around like this. You have to bank on the guys that are going to get volume, these bell cow guys, and Josh Jacobs is one of them. I don't know.
We can make an argument that Josh Jacobs can be considered for comeback player of the year. I mean, he had that good of a year.
Isn't the definition of that getting a little wonky now? Shouldn't it have something only to do with injury? Or now it's just, if he had a bad performance? You know what I mean?
Last year was his career worst on the
Right.
Raiders. And, he was pretty much written off. No one expected anything from him. And then this year he had definitely above average year, considering what you thought he was going to do.
Comeback player of the year is for like Alex Smith, that kind of thing.
Yeah, but those days are long gone now.
I guess. Yeah.
I mean, he needed scenery. He needed new scenery, and I think he, was on a younger roster, and he had a nice mentorship with that younger roster over there. He's been in the league since 2019. I thought it was a great fit, especially with the rest of the running back situation back there. They were just getting rid of the people that they didn't want to be there anymore. And then they had that young guy. Who was the backup over there?
Well, I was gonna bring that up. So they drafted a guy. I forget if it was the second round or the third. He was like the first or second running back off the board in the NFL draft, Marshawn Lloyd. But
Yeah.
Marshawn Lloyd, he couldn't stay healthy. Like he came on and off of IR or whatever it was. I would be a bit worried about that situation going forward. Josh Jacobs is getting a little bit older. Plus, they drafted a back in Lloyd. Now that could mean nothing. I mean, I'm just saying that.
I mean, we talk about that all. That's always brought up all the time. But you know what? Again, like in the same division on the Lions, they have two great running backs.
Right, I got you. I mean, this is fair. I wouldn't.
Now, actually the same thing, same division. With the Vikings, you got Cam Akers that's taking some run away from Jones now. So they're keeping themselves healthy. So I mean, there is some bell cow running back, and that there is that still, but you got to have that backup that's going to keep those fresh legs, and that's what it happens. That's what happens. So it's going to keep these guys healthy.
So Josh Jacobs, you drafted him as the running back 10 this year. So finishing at the running back 5, he returned really great value. Ultimately, if you got through the first couple of
Yeah.
weeks without freaking out. But I mean, it was a great year. Well, it'll be interesting to see just how let's say low he ends up falling ADP wise next year. I mean, some of the other stalwart names that we just kind of talked about, we know that we're going to end up drafting him over him, but it'll be an interesting discussion.
Yeah,
Um,
what was it? What was it? Week yeah, it was week 14. He started the game. I think he had like only like 4 rushing yards or something like that. And he had 3 touchdowns.
touchdowns. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's a
and
great.
then he had 66 yards at the end of the game, but he started looking like Jerome Bettis.
Yes. No, but he had a great year. Um, Finishing at number 6, we've got Kyron Williams, finishing about 10 points behind Jacobs at 255 points. This is an interesting one. So, you drafted him as the running back 8, he finishes at the running back 6, so he returned some pretty decent value. He didn't have a slow start or a fast start or a slow finish or a fast finish. He was real consistent throughout the whole year. Definitely had a couple duds in there. I mean, the Rams themselves, I mean, they were pretty inconsistent. I mean, they're putting up 44 points against the Bills, and then they beat the Cardinals 13-9. That's just to give you an idea of the Rams season this year.
Yeah, I think the only reason why he's up on this board, yes, I'm not going to take anything away of almost the 1,300 yards, but I mean, he had 14 touchdowns. That's what's bringing him up to the sixth rank, and touchdowns. I feel like are unless you're on a team that is he's a young guy. They also drafted Blake Corum. We don't know what's going to happen with that the situation with the front office situation. Who knows if there's going to be some sort of retirements kind of coming up and this and that. Yes, fantastic year, great finish. I'm just not sure if I can ride the bus onto next year.
I'll be honest. I thought from a running back perspective, even from a points perspective, I thought he was the most consistent running back this year as far as fantasy points go.
From
He had
start
the
to finish.
Yeah,
he had the second
100%.
he had the second highest attempts.
Not including Saquon. All right,
Yeah,
but yeah,
he had the second highest attempts at 316 attempts.
right.
And had his rushing, his average was 4.1, 14 touchdowns. So what really saved him this year, because for the amount of attempts that he had, I mean, what really saved him in fantasy this year was that 14 touchdowns.
Well, maybe
Well,
the
actually, sorry,
Rams.
16 touchdowns, two were of them through the air.
Well, maybe the Rams' identity is changing slightly. I mean, to your dismay, maybe there's a bit of a decline going on with Cooper Cup. I mean, as the ascension of Puka continues, and it
Yeah.
just becomes the Kyron and Puka show, in LA. Now, again, to your point, I know you're of the opinion that the Rams basically break up at some point. I mean,
It's
so if
gonna be
that's
like it's gonna be like the Beatles. They're gonna break up.
I mean, if that happens, and first of all, Sean McVay leaves, it'll be a completely different discussion about what happens with Kyron going forward. That having been
That's a
said,
great coaching area, coaching position to fill.
It will be. The Jets are never going to get him.
And I think your argument with the 14 touchdowns, adding to his value,
Yeah.
I could also say that also kind of concerns me with Saquon Barkley with tush push and Jalen Hurts is going to vulture a lot
It
of
didn't happen this year.
Saquon's touchdown. It did though.
Uh,
It did.
Still finished number one overall.
He only had 13 touchdowns.
Doesn't matter his rushing yards, his yards, his
absolutely
catches,
fit
all
into
that
those.
stuff.
It absolutely
Everything
fit
combined,
into those
when
numbers.
you have 345 attempts over 2,000 yards, you pay the guy 14 million a year. He's going to score those touchdowns. Yes, he was getting into a situation where you knew that was going to be taken away from him to an extent. But again, with Jalen Hurts having concussion and getting hurt over and over and over again, how many times do you think that tush push is really going to come in effect?
Yeah, right. But
it's going to slow down a
with
little
him
bit.
being healthy, it's going to come in more often than not, especially at the goal line.
We have to be consistent about how we analyze this. If we're going to criticize Kyron Williams for having a lot of his production come on the back of touchdowns, then we have to be consistent about how we say that about other backs. However, like in the case of Saquon, I mean, the man had 2,000 yards and a billion attempts, and obviously, but like Tommy, it is well noted what you're saying. I mean, he absolutely got, but the thing is, he's getting the touchdowns. He's getting the goal line work. I mean, don't take it away from him. I mean, he's absolutely getting it. And
again, I don't know if I could trust it going into next year. Let me put it this way: the next
when you say trust it, what does that mean? So in your book, obviously,
I don't see Kyron Williams finishing in. I see him finishing at the back end of this
upcoming draft. Okay.
Yeah.
So you wouldn't draft him in the first round?
Finishing next year at the back end of the top 12.
Well, then he would pass on him because guaranteed his ADP is going to be.
I'll say
five,
this: I'd rather take a Devon Achane next year over Kyron Williams.
I don't know. I don't know about that. I think I'd rather go Kyron over Achane. Because you look at the numbers and you look at the statistics, he's the most consistent running back, and he was this year.
Well, we could probably just parlay this. Talking about Achane. So Achane finished number 7, just behind Kyron,
with 5 touchdowns,
about 13, right? With 5 touchdowdowns, that's a good point.
And then 6 through the air,
right? So 242 points. Now, I don't know what to make of the whole Tua thing. I know that Achane produces better when there's a bit more of a passing presence, which wouldn't happen if Tua's not there. Then again, Tua's in and out anyway with 8,000 concussions anyway. Devon Achane's the guy. He's going to be the guy. He's not going to be, I mean, Raheem Mostert isn't a thing anymore. I mean, he's unbelievably explosive, but I'll just say that this year, as opposed to last year, he did not look as explosive as a player, just maybe to my eyes,
I think he did. I just don't. He had 192 attempts. A guy that's finishing number 7 with 192 attempts. I mean, that's not even. He has the least amount of attempps, and then the next person that's next to that is David Montgomery, and he finished 15th. The production is there, and it's a lot of it is through the passing game, and it doesn't matter if it's through the passing game or if it's through the ground game. I mean, it depends on where he finishes, and if he finishes above some of these other players that we're discussing. Now, granted, some of these other players, there were some injuries that we'll discuss in the next couple minutes, but I just think Devon Achane, when.
Well, let me ask you this, Tommy. So Devon Achane, right? You drafted him as the running back 11, so he finishes at the running back 7, so he returns good value.
Yep.
Okay, which fine, and everything's hindsight now. Going forward into next year, if you know that Tua is not the quarterback for whatever reason, whatever, if you know he's not the quarterback, does your opinion improve or decline about Achane?
Tua will be there. They made it very clear Tua is going to be there,
and it's not an injury. His injury concerns are not an issue.
The only person that if they're not there, this is a more upside position for them. Is Tyreek Hill is most likely trying to be out on. I don't know if he's just crying his way out or if he's gonna get an extension and he's gonna be all happy again. But if Hill is not there, this helps Devon Achane's position next
You
year.
think Hill not being there helps Achan?
Oh yeah, because basically Devon Achane took over some of the receptions that you would have saw from what's his name, Jalen Waddle. Jalen Waddle receptions, a lot, some of those went to him. Last year, prior year, 2023, you had kind of like the fire and ice kind of thing with Mostert and also Achan. Achan was injured on and off throughout the year.
That's true.
Um, they're a screen, little dump off kind of kind of system. So I just don't see it changing. I think it gets better if your deep threat of a Tyreek Hill is not there.
I, I don't.
You can survive in the NFL as a dink and dunk offense.
That's true. I just like some of the things I'll take umbrage with. First of all, most of the targets that were originally going to Waddle or whatever eventually went to Jonnu Smith.
Yeah.
First of all, I think Devon Achane performed about as well as you could expect with Tua in and out of the lineup for most of the year. I would be petrified if Tua gets at all injured next year. That's basically him for his whole career. That's it. He's done and he's out. They have already proven that when they don't have a consistent passing threat, Achan becomes extremely pedestrian as a fantasy back. I consider it extremely likely that Tua is going to be injured next year, and that'd be even worse if Hill's not there. You have to have some type of a passing presence. Again, I'm sure we'll argue about this come in the offseason, but I mean the numbers bear it out. It's just I don't see him. It's such a risk. You'd be willing to take that much of a risk versus other guys?
I mean, I'm not talking about number one overall pick.
Kyron.
I would take him over Kyron.
Oof.
Especially
I have a hard time doing
half,
that, but
half point PPR, full point PPR, I'd take him over Kyron. And another reason behind it is because Blake Corum looked good. He's going to only look better in that system next year. And then if for some reason something changes in this this offseason where McVay is no longer there, I am completely away from that offense.
Well, I mean, right. I mean, if Mike McDaniels is out, I mean, we could say we don't know that. We don't.
Old McDonald is not going anywhere.
Old McDonald. I mean, it remains to be seen. I don't know, Anthony. Do you kind of see what I'm saying? Like,
no,
am I right to be petrified about Tua?
I think the Dolphins have an identity crisis right now, and I think Tyreek is the root of that problem.
Yeah,
So
right, well.
if he goes, which I think at this point is highly likely. I mean, I don't know because I don't know how he stays, and he's voiced his frustration, and why would you want to keep a guy around like that? It's only going to just cause more headaches for your team. Yeah. I think if he goes, that's going to change a lot of things, and it's going to change their offensive game plan. I mean, we could sit here and argue and say, well, it didn't matter anyways this year because he didn't have a good fantasy year, but he still gives you that big playability and stretches the field for you so much because of his speed. And I think losing that, Waddle's not that speedy guy like Tyreek, so I think your options are going to be a little more limited if Tyreek Hill is gone.
Yeah, I mean he's so hot and cold.
Considering how fast Waddle is, that he's not the speedy guy.
No, I know, and that's what's crazy. But you're not now. Waddle becomes the number one, but
right.
It's harder to see. Like Tyreek is known for just burning everyone and getting down the field. I'm
gonna tell you right now. Achane is gonna be one of these names that we argue about. I could already see it because it's there's so much up in the air with this, and comparing him against some of these other guys, Tommy, it's just like it's like such a risk versus consistency thing.
And this is going to be an unpopular opinion, but I would actually consider David Montgomery over Devon Achane because of a consistent perspective. David Montgomery is going to give you a more consistent production. You know what you're going to get out of him. Day in and day. You know he's going to split with Jameer, but you know he's going to get his touches and you know he's going to get his touchdowns. That's always going to be solidified. Achane, I think is too, like Billy said, is very quarterback dependent. And improved that this year when Tua was out versus when Tua was in.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. I'll be honest. I could see the Tennessee Titans trying to make a push for Tyreek Hill next year because if they take Sanders, that'd be a prime spot for him.
I'm sure we'll have a lot of discussions about Sanders this offseason too. All right, let's move on to number 8, James Cook, and we're going to put a big asterisk on this one. So he finished just behind Devon Achan in total points, just like a point behind. Um, but he was unbelievable. His average was significantly higher than Achan's because he just didn't play week 6, so you wouldn't have played him. Um, Started off good, had some good games, but his basically his second half of the year is really what put him over the edge. You drafted him as the running back 13. He finishes as a running back 8, so he returned great value for you. I mean, he essentially he got you right to your fantasy championships. 25.8 points in week 15, 26.1 points in week 16. I had the pleasure of facing James Cook in 3 different fantasy leagues in week 16. And man, I did not make it past any of those 3. Just to, to put in perspective, he was great. There's no way that James Cook is going to be drafted um, in the realm of some of these other guys. We know that already, but he just gets perennially disregarded. I mean, he's finishing as running back 8 here. I doubt he'll be drafted as the running back 8. I doubt we'll rank him as the running back 8. Going into next year, but I mean, why shouldn't we be excited about him? He's going to come back into next year on a great team, depending on whatever happens with the Bills this year. They got a quarterback that's going to light it up. I got it. He steals a lot of touchdowns, but why shouldn't we be more bullish on James Cook next year?
Uh, I don't. I mean, James Cook scores a lot of touchdowns too.
That's
So
right.
I mean, he scored. I think that's just the product of that kind of flow of that offense. So I mean, he is the RB1. He is not being overtaken by anybody else. He is a great running back. I mean, he's another guy that I could see finishing in the top 5 next year. If there's some sort of regression with with Allen rushing for touchdowns, there's a possibility. I mean, obviously, the NFL always protects their quarterbacks. So, there could be a position where, I won't say the NFL will tell coaches to stop running the ball with their quarterbacks, but that there's a possibility that something like that can happen if people start getting injured. So,
Uh, okay.
So I actually
Uh,
think that he
I,
possibly
I'm,
could
I
be.
can't believe I'm about to let that slide. But for the sake of this conversation, go ahead, Anthony. But
I
yeah,
feel like he could be ranked at an ADP of 8, though. Now that I'm sitting here thinking about it, because he has no competition as of right now for anyone stealing touches unless they go and draft somebody in the draft.
well, Ray Davis was
yeah,
the
Ray
rookie,
Davis.
and I mean
Yeah, but
he looked great in the week that he
he
was
showed
out, but Cook
flashes.
looked better.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he showed flashes, but I don't think he's in there. Listen, there are some teams that I can go over where I seriously think that they're going to have a running back discrepancy going into 2025, but James Cook is just not one of them at this moment. Like I said, unless they surprise everyone and draft a stud running back in the draft, but um I think he looked good. He served his purpose. He put up good numbers. He was consistent, and that offense scores a lot of points, which is a huge thing for me as far as the fantasy perspective goes. And um, Josh Allen, yes, is going to steal some of that rushing touchdowns and have carries, but I think he's a safe pick. I think that's the better term for it. He's a safe pick going into next year, and
You
I
know,
feel
you know, Ray
comfortable having him on
Davis.
my team.
Ray Davis kind of reminds me of like Fred Jackson, the way he runs the ball, and that's going back a little bit, but Fred Davis reminds me yeah, sorry, Davis reminds me of a Fred Jackson, and not
Fred,
saying that
Fred, Fred
he
Jackson, 10 years ago, backup running back for the Bills, who had like 2 real good games. Yes.
well, I mean, he's the number 3 rushing leader for the Bills.
I'm just saying, yeah, like
But what I'm saying is he
deep
reminds me
cuts.
of a good backup for Cook. And I think that's good for James Cook too. I think that's good for James Cook's position for next year going into it with a backup like that. Not say, I feel like the NFL is also a copycat system as well. You start seeing Jahmyr Gibbs and Montgomery doing it for the past what 2 years? 2 years, right? Was it? No,
2
yeah,
years.
it's 2 years.
Hmm.
Um, they're doing for the past 2 years, and then you have these other teams that are kind of fit that model as well. You have Akers and Jones in the same division. You have a Blake Corum that's kind of spelling Williams now to an extent. Um, there's other, teams as well. We could go down the line with that, but I really think that James Cook, if they get Ray Davis moving and getting more touches and those elements, I think James Cook's value can be so much higher than finishing number 8. I mean, he was drafted as RB13, ADP
Right.
of 30, 33, 33 and a half. So,
I
you know,
agree, but like he's going to be like this is what he's going to be perennially. He's going to be drafted as a high end running back too,
yeah.
and like in all of our opinions, like we all have the same sentiment. Like I think the fantasy community should start to get on board here. Like his ceiling is just higher. He's a
Yeah.
performing back on a great team. I
Yeah,
mean,
and I think next year, if you look at it, he's probably going to be drafted where Saquon was drafted this year. To be
oh, I
honest,
think he'll be below that. I mean, Saquon was drafted as the running back 4. We just said that he. I mean, there's no way he's going to be that drafted that high. We just
yeah,
said like
just based on his touchdown production and that offense. I mean, if they go further in this and they win the Super Bowl, let's just say, I don't see how he's not a top 6, 7 running back taken.
I
And
guess
honestly, I
but
think
you got to
a
take in
lot of people take
perspective.
these running backs a lot more consistently now in drafts.
I think it depends on the format too. I think if it's full point PPR, he's going to be drafted a lot lower. I think if it's no PPR, yeah, he's going to go high in the first round.
Um, yeah, so as I mentioned at the top of James Cook, so the asterisk, so he finished behind Kyron and Devon Achane in total points, but his average was above both of them. As is the next guy we're going to talk about. So finishing at number 9 is Alvin Kamara, finishing 10 points behind James Cook at 231 overall points. So his average
He's
was even
toast.
higher. His
He's
average was
toast.
even higher. I mean, he would have finished basically as the running back 6 if he kept on pace. And the problem is he just missed week 16 and 17. Now, I thought, to Tommy's point, so watching the injury in week 15 when it happened, I knew that he was done. I basically knew that he was done for the year, although they were stupidly coy about it. But if Kendre Miller would have done anything in week 16, 17, and 18, I would have been like, Kamara's toast. This is it. He's not going to be anything next year. The fact that Kendre Miller did nothing, and the fact that Alvin Kamara has at least 2 more years left on his contract, if I'm remembering correctly, I mean, he's going to. Why wouldn't he be drafted well past where he ultimately going to finish? He's the only guy left in New Orleans. We don't know who the head coach is going to be yet, so we'll wait on that. We don't know who the quarterback necessarily is going to be. It's probably going to be Derek Carr again. I mean, to put in perspective, he was drafted as the running back 17 this past year, and he finishes the running back 9. An
Yeah.
unbelievable. I guarantee his ADP is going to be like running back 25, and he'll finish at like running back 13 again.
Nah, I don't. I'm not a Kamara guy,
Then
honestly.
who's going to be the back in New Orleans then?
He hasn't
Next year?
he hasn't had he hasn't had double-digit touchdowns for the entire season since 2020.
But he doesn't need it. He's getting it off the back of just catching the ball
Yeah,
a
I get
thousand
it, but
times a
I
game.
get it. I get it, but I mean, the guy he gets hurt a lot too. I mean, last year, this year alone, he had 14 games. Last year, he had 13 games, 15 games, 13 games, 15 games. He hasn't had a full season.
Right, but you wouldn't have needed it. Alvin Kamara up until week 16 was basically the running back 5 or 6. Um, like I don't know, like considering where you drafted him, you would have been petrified to draft him at running back 17. That's where he was drafted this year.
No, I mean, I think if you drafted him there, it's a great play. But I feel like, there's a lot of people out there that will overdraft him, and I just don't think it's a good position to be in. You could have better positions. You could have better players in those positions to draft.
I mean, I'm sure we'll talk about it in the offseason. A lot of it depends on, like we said, head coach, what the situation is. All right.
I think there's going to be more regression next year for
And
Alvin
once again,
Kamara.
too, it also depends on format because we're looking at it as a full point PPR
PPR.
perspective. If you look at it at half point or no PPR, yeah, I don't even think Kamara's draftable in the first round at that point.
Well, not definitely not in the first round, but I mean, I'm reading you the points from half point PPR here. I mean, he came through, he did it. Now, again, maybe we could talk on this is why I'm saying about the scarcity of running backs who get all the work. So it's worth keeping in mind that he got all the work. That's why I'm asking Tommy,
I mean, there's no competition. I agree.
Who's the running back in New Orleans?
Well, if Kendra Miller stays healthy.
After that, after those performances, we'll see.
I don't know. I mean, you got a whole offseason. So the dynamic can change. I mean,
wasn't Jamal Williams there or no?
Oh, yeah, but they destroyed his career.
Jamal Williams he's off a cliff. Yeah. I'll be super curious.
The Saints destroyed his career. They were like, hey, you're the touchdown leader of, you scored all those touchdowns. Come over here. We'll pay you. Oh, you're not going to play. Ha ha.
You mark my words with this one. So if Derek Carr's still the quarterback and then they get like let's say a not a crazy head coach hire, Alvin Kamara's still the running back. They don't draft anybody. It's still Alvin Kamara and then Kendre Miller. Guaranteed Alvin Kamara is going to be his ADP is going to be about running back 20 to 24, and he'll vastly outperform that.
No, he will outperform it. I'm just not sure if I will take him early in drafts next year.
It also depends on Taysom Hill's health too. If that guy stays healthy, he vultures touchdowns. So
yeah,
that's fire and ice right there. Yeah, it's earth, wind, and fire. Just basically you got Taysom Hill is earth and wind.
Yeah, so as we mentioned, so James Cook and Alvin Kamara, we gave them a little bit of asterisks here because to your team, they performed better than Kyron and Devon Achane, considering that their average, their points per game were better. So let's move on to the last three guys here. There's no asterisks needed. They played the whole year. Well, they played the whole year from 1 to 17. So finishing at number 10 is James Conner. Finishing with 230 points. You drafted him as the running back 20, finishes the running back 10. I mean, he just continues to be the guy for Arizona. It doesn't matter how old he gets, doesn't matter the situations, doesn't matter how good or bad.
They extended him for 3 years too.
Exactly. It doesn't matter that they drafted the guy, Trey Benson, I believe his name is. Nope. Just keep rolling with James Conner.
James Conner is a tremendous story, man. Like, especially him coming off of the cancer and having that, in college, coming out and just destroying it and just having such a great career. He's definitely he's a fantastic RB2, and when he comes down to fantasy football, he's going to get you those touchdowns. We'll see what happens with that offense next year. I heard some chatter about Kyler Murray maybe getting a bit of a move to another AFC team. We'll see, but we'll see in that offseason.
Anthony, did you hear that?
Yeah.
I didn't hear about that.
There is chatter that he might be going over to the Steelers. Steelers are making a push for Kyler Murray.
Oh my
I don't
God!
know why they want to do away with Russell Wilson though. He actually didn't have a bad year for him.
He's still Russell Wilson. He's still unlimited.
I watched that game this past against the Bengals. I blame George Pickens more than anything. I think Russ made one bad throw, but George Pickens did not help Russ's cause in that game.
No, and but I mean, Pickens has been good for Russell Wilson, so I don't want to inundate him just because of indict him because of 2 games. So I mean, it's been good for Russell, but I mean, back to Conner. I mean, we were lamenting the Cardinals this whole season for being basically hot and cold the entire season. Sometimes Kyler's good, sometimes the Cardinals are good, sometimes they're bad. Conner was consistent the whole year. I mean, he definitely had a few games that weren't the best, but he finished the game. I mean, weeks 14, 15, and 16, getting you to the playoffs and your first 2 rounds of the playoffs, he was the best back in football, bar none. So, I mean, we'll see how it shapes up next year. I mean, at some point, he just this is every year with him. He's being, he's finishing top 10, doing amazing. At some point, it has to end. It'll be an interesting conversation this coming year.
Finishing top 10, and he's getting drafted in the 4th round.
What's crazy is that if Marvin Harrison just lived up to half of his hype potential this year, Conner could have had that much of a better year because the focus could have been so much more on Harrison, opening up the box more for Conner, but that's also, dependent on quarterback play, unfortunately.
Yep. I agree. So we thought James Conner, if you thought James Conner was a good value, let's talk about the next 2 guys here. Finishing at number 11 with 228 points is Chase Brown, running back for the Cincinnati Bengals. This was an unbelievable season. And just basically,
He
we
is the
just have to
waiver wire hero.
basically, if you drafted him on a shot, guaranteed that people dropped him after a couple weeks. But if you did stick with him, or if you did try, I mean, basically from week 4 on, we're talking about a what, top 5, top 6 running back the entire year. He
Yeah.
got you to the playoffs. He performed well in your play. Like, it was an unbelievable year. Now I had Anthony. I had this whole conversation with Tommy last week, just kind of, just kind of briefly recapping the year, and we talked about Chase Brown. And my answer to him when he was asking me how I feel about him next year was, I am petrified, because we've seen this before. This is like the James Robinson story. There any umpteen amount of guys that we could be like, free agent guy who we know is more talented, who's amazing, had a great year, and then because of whatever draft capital or coaches that want to change the scheme or other guys, next year they just disappear into the sunset. If you remember, Chase Brown wasn't going to be the guy. It took Zach Moss going down before Chase Brown really took off. Um, is it, am I being too cautious about this, or after the performance that he had, do they just roll with Chase Brown Cincinnati next year? Because he basically on an from that point on, the fact since the point he took on, he was basically the 4th or 5th best back in football. What do you think?
So I see your point and I see where you're coming from. I just feel like he had too good of a year to be ignored and to say, all right, Zach Moss is coming back, so we're going to roll with him, and Chase Brown's back to being the backup. No, I think that Chase Brown's going to be the starter going in next year. I expect him to have a full workload, especially if they keep that core group together. He's such an integral part of their offense now. And I can't see, me personally, I just can't see them switching things up. There's no need for it. Where the Bengals went wrong was their defense, and that's their biggest priority at the moment, I think. And they have to get that situated. Their offense, to me, maybe their offensive line needs to work, and that's another amazing thing. He did all that with a terrible offensive line, because the Browns' offensive line or the Bengals' offensive line, excuse me, is awful. Okay, and he still put up those numbers with that line.
I mean, what opened the field for him was Jamar Chase and Higgins.
Well, yeah, and that's what I mean. If they stay together, I think they're rolling with him 100%. I can't see it any other way.
Yeah, I mean, he was drafted as the running back 37, which essentially was somewhere around round 8 or so. And then, like we said, guaranteed he ended up on people's waiver wires after however many weeks or whatever it was.
Well,
I'm feeling
the only reason why he didn't finish higher was because the first 3 weeks.
basically
And the first 3 weeks is because they had Zach Moss in there, kind of, he was spelling Zach Moss, and then they realized Zach
at
Moss was
some
not,
point.
then he got hurt, and that's when he exploded week 4.
Yeah.
And I think didn't they go and sign Khalil Herbert too?
Well, yeah, they signed Khalil Herbert. It was I think
The moment that Moss got hit the IR, they signed Khalil Herbert.
Yeah, but it was like, I think it was mid-season when they signed Khalil Herbert.
And he's actually not a bad backup.
Yeah, but remember we chatted about this when Khalil Herbert. I thought Khalil Herbert was going to start taking a lot more carries. I thought he was going to spelling him a little bit more. The first carry he had, he fumbled the ball, and you didn't see him back back in on the field for I think 3 or 4 games.
Anyway, you slice it, it was an unbelievable year. Yeah, I mean, we'll talk more about it. We'll see. We'll keep an eye on the moves that Cincinnati makes. I could tell you, if they don't draft anybody, if they don't make any other moves, and if everything else stays pretty static, I'll be all in on Chase Brown, especially over and including over some of the names that we've already talked about.
I'd be more high on the next guy we're going to talk about.
Well, let's just jump right into him. So last on the list, finishing at number 12, Chuba Hubbard. Hubba Hubbard.
Hubba hubba.
So finishing at 220 points, you drafted him as the running back 42, as basically the 119 overall. So basically the 11th or 12th round, finishing as the running back 12. An unbelievable season for Chuba. Didn't play in week 17, obviously, but so he didn't count against his average. But yeah, go ahead, take it.
Let me give you a stat real quick. All right. Tackle for lost yards, right? So Saquon Barkley has minus 80 yards tackle for loss yards. Chuba Hubbard has had 200. Let's say anybody over 200 rushing attempts. He had minus 28 yards. This guy fights every single time. He doesn't give up. He doesn't take a loss. 28 minus 28 yards for tackle for loss yards. 15 games, 250 yards. The guy he just missed 1,200 yards. He's receiving the ball as well. Um, I think this is a guy that every year he's drafted 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 in that round. He's gonna bump up, but I think he's still gonna be underdrafted.
I'm going to tell you right now, I agree with you. He's going to be criminally underdrafted this
Yeah,
year.
and I would feel so comfortable going a wide receiver strategy and taking him as a Mario RB2.
Absolutely. I mean, people are going to be obsessed with the Jonathan Brooks thing, not realizing that
Yep.
for Jonathan Brooks to come back next year, it's going to be astronomical. They invested in Chuba Hubbard. They know he's talented. He is a great, and Bryce is getting better. I mean, we saw the Panthers
Oh yeah.
like slice and dice the Falcons defense to close the year out.
Oh yeah. Yeah, what do you
It's
think?
I think Chuba Hubbard's going to be the guy. I mean, Jonathan Brooks came off an ACL injury, right? When he
he
came
came off
back, and then he did it again.
yep.
So now you're looking at two ACL injuries. I put it this way. I think at this point they see what they have out of Chuba Hubbard. There is zero rush to get Jonathan Brooks back, especially he's so young in his career, and if he wants a chance to actually play, I think you give him all the time in the world. You let him fully recover. I wouldn't be surprised if Jonathan Brooks doesn't play at all next year. I could actually see that happen.
I agree with you. It's possible. Maybe they'll work him in towards the end or something.
And I think that's probably slim. But I like I said, I could be wrong. But with the second ACL injury, I think you tread with caution, and I would feel comfortable drafting Chuba Hubbard, like Tommy said, go wide receiver, and Chuba Hubbard as a wide running back too. I mean, that
I
guy
mean,
was
I mean
literally
to I mean
asked for this
just
year.
to refresh everybody's memory, like so three seasons ago, I mean when McCaffrey was leaving the Panthers and the Panthers were completely barren, Chuba finished the year strong and
Yeah.
had a great strong part of the year. The next year they brought in Miles Sanders, paid him a whole lot of money. Didn't matter. Chuba outperformed him, beat him out, eventually took it over, had a great strong finish to the
That
year.
was crazy. Sanders had a fantastic week 18.
Right. Well, now this past year, Chuba is, like they drafted the number one guy. We know that Carolina was going to be a team. Nope, doesn't matter. Chuba Hubbard, unbelievable year. I mean, other than week one, which was admittedly really awful, basically every week after that, you were happy. There was a little bit of blips in there, but I mean, he's going to be criminally underdrafted this coming draft season, basically because of the Jonathan Brooks thing. Maybe
Yep.
people will start to wisen up about it, but I mean, there's a question for you both. Just take the last two guys that we just talked about, Chase Brown and Chuba Hubbard. I mean, these are guys that were drafted, unbelievably down in the draft, and they finished in the top 12. Who do you think was more valuable to winning a fantasy team
This year, I would say
this year?
probably Chuba Hubbard.
I think it's close. I think it's
Yeah.
close.
I mean,
It's
I
super
think
close,
if
yeah.
Chuba wasn't hurt week 17, which was the championship,
Right.
he got you to the championship with a 30.5 point game in week 16.
Right.
But a lot of people, as you drafted him, he wasn't your RB2, he wasn't your RB1, so he was your flex most likely this year, and I think Chuba was the most valuable.
I I I I would have leaned. I guess I'll agree with you. Maybe I'll agree with you. I would have kind of maybe leans toward Chase Brown, but the fact that Chuba did what he did, kind of after week two on, and then like he didn't
I
even
mean,
play
I
in week
bet you, I
17.
bet
But
you there was people out there that had both Chase Brown and Hubbard.
They were both a lot of people's waiver wire picks this year too. Let's not
right,
forget
Yep.
about that, especially in 10-team leagues. We'll say.
Yeah, people
You guys
freaked out
can
about
sign
that
up for the
1.4
waiver.
week 1.
Yeah, so quick little summary here. So as I mentioned right at the top, so this is why we talk about, bell cow backs and guys that you want to spend early picks on. Let's not discount how great guys like Chase Brown and Chuba Hubbard were, but they were 100 points behind guys like Saquon Barkley,
Oh, yeah.
and a little less so than Derrick Henry, Jahmyr Gibbs. The point is that when we get into draft season, we're going to talk about this of like going above and beyond to try to get a hold of these guys. And then maybe to Tommy's point, if you can't get a hold of these guys, then maybe you, like he said, you get your amazing wide receivers earlier. And then if you're picking up your second and third backs is Chuba Hubbard, and what, like this year, imagine if you had James Conner and Chuba Hubbard that you grabbed along with like Jamar Chase and somebody in your second round. You would have won that league.
I actually have
Now,
a quick question for you guys. I wanted to get your guys' opinion on
yeah.
as far as running back perspective goes and going into next year. There's two teams that come into mind for me and where I think it'd be difficult to say on who to draft, even though I kind of have a clear picture of who I would go, but it's a good discussion to have. So the first example I have is Jacksonville. Is it going to be Travis Etienne next year, or are we drafting Tank Bigsby over him?
That's Travis Etienne.
With the year that Travis Etienne had, I and Bigsby looks like the better back. I think it's going to be difficult. My second example,
23 was 23. They were really preaching Bigsby, but I mean they have a new coach. Yeah, there's going to be a new coaching situation over there. There was a lot of injury. I think it's Etienne.
You do. I think it's Bigsby.
I have no comment. I don't want anything to do with that backfield right now.
And then my other example is it's a really bad offense, but the Browns. Are we drafting Nick Chubb over Jerome Ford next year, or would you take Jerome
Chubb's back?
Ford?
Chubb's back.
Think so? Given his injuries and his age,
Chubb's back.
I agree with you, Anthony. I don't know, man.
It's tough. If you think about it, it's tough.
Chubb's back, and I think again, it's the system. It's the NFL system. Have two running backs. Have a massive running back, and then you have your backup guy that can actually spell him. That's it.
But we talked about this during the season. Like for fantasy purposes, that's fine. We can make it work for teams like Detroit. Not for teams that are putting up, 13, 14, 15 points a game, or, they don't have a good offense or something.
We will see what happens in this NFL draft this year because the Browns own the number 2 pick.
Right. We'll see what happens. We don't have to talk about, the horridness of the Cleveland Browns. Maybe they get a quarterback change, or maybe they're locked into Deshaun Watson for the next 3 years.
Kirk Cousins to the Browns, you said?
No, I never said that.
Oh man,
I could see him going to the G-men.
Ugh. It'll be interesting to see it, but there we go. Any closing thoughts?
Yeah, we just again off season we're going to be bringing you guys at least one video a week. Obviously, no NFL Live or Fantasy Football Live this weekend. But again, we truly appreciate everybody that takes the moment to listen to our video, that subscribe. If you guys can share, like, subscribe for us, and tune in every single week, and we're going to bring you some great content.
Definitely. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.